Blog Talk Radio.
Are you ready to take a bite out of the competition? Are you looking for ideas to make your business better? Welcome to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet,
sponsored by Apple Capital Group.
At the core of every successful business, you'll find people making a difference. And with each episode of the Core Business Show, we talk with those people, examine those ideas, and explore the strategies that make them special. Now, the host of the Core Business Show, Tim Jacquet.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Core Business Show. I'm Tim Jacquet, your host. Today, our topic is the Fast and Furious Kill 16 Youth. Our special guest today is Clabe Taylor. He's an expert on Latin America, Russia, Ukrainian security issues, and the current author of Mako, and his new book, Tex-Mex, will be out next November. Okay, welcome to the show.
Tim, good morning. Nice to appreciate you having me on.
Great. I guess to begin with, like I just mentioned before we went on the air, our audience love personal stories, knowing about the authors. So kind of tell us about where you're from and how you got into writing, and then we can segue into your current book that you have on the market.
Yeah. I'm actually from Texas. I'm in Fort Worth right now, probably just next door to you,
okay.
right?
Yeah, right down the street.
And yeah. And I was in the military for a few years, went to the Defense Language Institute, studied Russian. Then I was in the Foreign Service, studied Spanish at the Foreign Service Institute outside of Washington. And I had a number of overseas postings at our embassies, including in Moscow and Western Europe and Latin America. And then I was in private industry over in Russia and Ukraine and Central Asia for a number of years. Still have a small business with a production facility over in Ukraine, as a matter of fact. And started writing a few years ago and wrote a couple of novels. Have, as you mentioned, one of my novels is called Tex-Mex, which deals with the drug war and a fictional situation down in South Texas where the cartels try to take over politically. And that's coming out in November, and looking forward to that. And I split my time now between the United States and Central America, where I bought a house a few years ago, and I go down there basically just to surf, though.
So you coming up, I mean, what a range of before you decided to go in the military, did you kind of predict that you were going to go to this particular course, you're going to go to the military, and then later become a writer? Oh
no, the writing came much later. As a matter of fact, it was a friend of mine suggested that I try to write after I heard a little bit about my life and thought I might have something to say. I guess whether I have something to say, that's still out for the jury, but I've only been writing for about 3 years. I did a lot of writing, of course, in the Foreign Service, but completely different when you're writing fiction than when you're writing intelligence reports.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so definitely when I was a younger man, I certainly didn't plan out anything like, this is what I want to do, and then this is the next step. It was sort of a free fall, sort of this intuition and just playing everything by ear.
Wow. When you decided to write this first book called Mako, how did you come up with the title, and how did you come up with the basis of the story?
Well, the title is actually the main character's first name. His name is Mako Sloan, and he's sort of a rogue CIA officer, not in the Sarah Palin mode, but I mean, he's a hard-drinking, pot-smoking, womanizing CIA officer abroad, and he has some pretty wild adventures. Like I said, it's kind of a parody of a spy novel. I have some world leaders, some fictionalized world leaders doing some outrageous things and saying some outrageous things. It was a lot of fun, and it's not supposed to be entirely serious, although there are a few commentaries on world affairs that maybe are worth taking seriously. But it was kind of a fun deal. Started writing it as a joke almost, and then I sort of liked the process and got a publisher interested in it and went from there.
Wow. So even when you come to writing that particular story, did it take a long time to write something like this novel?
I wrote that first novel probably in about 10 months. It's about, I guess, close to 400 pages, and I spent a lot of time on it. Second novel I wrote actually more quickly, but I've rewritten that probably about 10 times. I had an editor in New York that had some suggestions. Didn't like some of the political ramifications of the book. He thought I was overreaching. I took some of that to heart and tried to make it I took out some of the more outrageous things, I think, but it's got some hyperbole in it. But I probably spent more time rewriting that book than I actually did writing it.
Does it take a lot of focus to sit there and write something Some people can pull a book out in 5 days with this great imagination. Some other people, it takes them time. What type of energy or what type of inspiration for you to go and write something?
It's Tex-Mex was easier for me to write probably because being from Texas and it deals with Mexico a lot, which is a country that I feel a great deal of affinity towards. I lived down there for a number of years. But writing is something where sometimes it flows and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, sometimes I can sit down and write 20 pages in a very short period of time, and other times I feel like I have intellectual constipation, and you just sort of have to wait for it to come back. It's difficult for me to sit down and outline, for example, the whole book. Sometimes, I'm writing and in the middle of a chapter, and I'll decide to go a completely different direction. So I think every author has his own methodology, and I've talked to authors who outline everything and other authors who don't outline a single thing. So it really varies.
When your writing comes to you, I'm sure you use life experiences, people around you to write about anything that's really funny without mentioning a name, that, hey, this is this person here. I just made him into a character and just kind of enhanced it, or just put the way he is. Because some people naturally are just funny the way they do things.
Yeah, that's true. I think what I did, I took some real characters, some public figures actually, fictionalized them. Some of them I kept their own names, and I think Vladimir Putin probably I'll have a lawsuit arriving on my desk any day from him. But I like to take real life figures and sort of maybe do a parody of them, maybe extrapolate on maybe what I think they're really thinking. In Tex-Mex, I do have a governor who looks and talks very much like somebody that we might be familiar with. So yeah, you definitely take a lot of things from real life. I have some characters that some people have accused me of trying to fictionalize myself. And I just tell them, well, that character is probably what I would like to be, but, never was. I'm sort of it's easy to be a writer, or you hear people talking about, they use the phrase, the wannabe. Well, it's pretty easy to be a writer and make yourself into something completely different, rewrite yourself. That's always kind of fun.
Wow. Let's take a break real quick and we come back and kind of talk more about this book. We'll be back in a moment. You listen to the Core.
You're listening to the Core Business Show, sponsored by Apple Capital Group. Apple Capital Group in Jacksonville, Florida, is a commercial lender that specializes in asset-based loans, equipment leasing and financing, invoice financing, commercial real estate loans, and asset-based financing in the U.S. and Canada. Apple Capital Group is a direct lender that lends on their private equity investment portfolio. 90% of most loans are decided within 2 hours, and vendor funding within 24 hours after documents are completed, with a one-page application. No slow no's, just a quick decision and a fast yes. To get more information about lending from Apple Capital Group, call 866-611-7457. That's 866-611-7457 to speak with one of our loan specialists. Or visit us right now at applecapitalgroup.com. Welcome back to the Core. Once again, here's Tim Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome back. We're talking about Mako, book by Clabe Taylor. Tell us your experience dealing with really security. I mean, you've dealt with Russia and Ukraine security. Kind of tell us your background and how that played a part of you to your second book, Tex-Mex.
Yeah, a few former colleagues and I formed an organization, I guess you could call it. We call it Spy Masters Literary Guild. We have a website, spymastersguild.com. I guess the reason that we started that was because we had all read a lot of spy novels or espionage novels that we thought were a little bit lame. Now, I'm not talking about John Le Carré because his stuff is fantastic, but there are espionage thriller writers out there who write about espionage, write about international intrigue, and they have absolutely no knowledge of it. They have no personal experience with it, and it just reads like, I don't know, it reads like a vampire novel with some espionage thrown in. I mean, just completely off the wall, completely unlikely. So we think that in the books that we've written, that even if the plot is a little bit off the wall, even if we're talking about a parody, that there's actually a feeling of reality in there based on our own experiences. I mean, I don't think that some of the writers out there who are writing about espionage have ever handled an agent overseas or have ever been in Moscow under KGB surveillance or anything like that during the Cold War. So we thought that would add a certain degree of credibility to our work. And one of my colleagues, his name is Michael Davidson, has written a number of novels. They're not all out yet, but his first novel was called Harry's Rules. And he bases his novel on sort of an interesting concept that in Russia right now you have a triumvirate of power shared between organized crime, business, and the government that is very difficult to separate those things. We do take our own experience into account and put it into the book. And in Tex-Mex, I do the same thing with the drug traffickers, with the cartels. I worked a little bit in that area down in Mexico. And I always like to add a certain amount of fantasy also, a little political fantasy to that to spice it up a little bit. But at the core of it, there's some very basic truths that we've had direct experience with.
Okay. With that particular experience itself, everybody can't visualize. I mean, if an author writes something, they do their research with people and they write, taking their own experience and trying to write a normal novel. However, when you actually go into those type of situations, kind of tell us behind the scenes what those type of situations are. The real risk and danger by being in these different countries that, of course, you have the U.S. behind you if you work for them, but also you don't have them because if not with you at that particular time when something happens. Kind of tell us, in one sense, what is that really like? Because you do have the government behind you. However, if you not you off guard, but it's a timing issue. If you by yourself and something happens, you're on your own.
Yeah, Tim, you actually bring up a very good point that you do have the U.S. government behind you, and in most cases, that's gonna pull you out of the fire, and if things go south. Now, as we saw in Benghazi recently with the murder of the 4 American diplomats, sometimes that doesn't really help you. But if we go back to the Cold War, for example, and in one sentence, I'll just say this, that your main responsibility and the main risk that you run is not that anything bad is going to happen to you, but something bad is going to happen to that guy that you're meeting, that guy that's giving you information. He's risking his life, and you are risking his life in the way that you handle him. So if you're not careful and he gets caught, the result is he dies. So that's the ultimate responsibility that you have when you're out there.
Wow. Why would a person take the risk on the person that is going to give you the information? He knows he has a lot at stake. Why would they give you this type of information to escape their situation, or can they escape the situation?
Well, the motivations can be their wide range of motivations, ranging from the most base, the most greedy. Somebody might just want money. Maybe they want, out of their marriage. Maybe they're drinking too much. Maybe they have problems at work. They want revenge. And that could range all the way up to the guy who does it for ideological reasons. Maybe he's, especially in the old Soviet Union, maybe he's against the regime. He resents the oppression that he's experienced. Maybe his relatives went to prison or died in the gulag. It can be any number of things in that regard. So it really varies. There's not one type of motivation that you can point to, really. I've seen pretty much all of those in play.
Okay. Let's kind of focus back on the Fast and 16 Youth. What was the original goal for the Fast and Furious operation?
Well, that was an operation run by the ATF in Arizona. We've got a lot of guns going across the border into Mexico and arming the drug cartels down there. And the original thinking was that the U.S. government or the ATF wanted to not just catch the guys that were buying 1 or 2 weapons and selling them to the drug traffickers illegally. They wanted to go a little bit higher up that chain of command and find the people who were commissioning these large purchases. The only problem was once those weapons got into Mexico, it was very difficult, if not impossible, to trace them. So it was a boneheaded operation to begin with, and it was complicated by the fact that the local prosecutors did not seem to be interested in issuing indictments to the people who were buying those weapons. And part of that is due to the gun laws. They're very liberal. In Arizona, you can go into a store, into a gun shop, and I think there's something like 853 registered gun dealers in Phoenix alone. You can go in there and buy multiple AK-47s, walk out on the street and give them to somebody. I mean, there was one case, Tim, that a guy who was on food stamps over the course of 9 months bought something like $300,000 worth of weapons, and the local prosecutors or the federal prosecutors would not issue an indictment, even when the ATF then tried to get an indictment against him on fraud for taking government assistance and then making all these purchases in cash. So it was a very difficult situation, and as you mentioned, it had tragic implications when those weapons were found at crime scenes in Mexico, and that one in particular that you mentioned, where 16 young people were slaughtered at a party in Juarez.
Wow. So what happened to this particular mission? How did it just go away? I mean, it's just someone makes a few mistakes and then try to cover it up, or just what happened?
Well, we might not have found out about it except for back in, I guess it was December 2010, a U.S. Border Patrol agent, Brian Terry, was murdered in the line of duty by an armed group of Mexicans that had crossed the border, Mexican nationals. And two of the weapons, I believe it was, turned out to be from that operation. They were identified by the serial numbers from that operation. And that's when the news became national, and then it led to the scandal with Congress, and it became just a political football. The Republicans were trying to, or they actually did get the Attorney General cited for contempt for refusing to turn over some documents. The president claimed executive privilege, and you saw it turned into a political circus. And I think everybody was just interested in covering their behinds at that point. And I think in the scandal that followed, I think we lost sight of the overall issue that this border that we have is porous, not only coming from Mexico into the U.S., but from the U.S. into Mexico as well. That guns are just pouring across that border, quite apart from any operation, from any single operations the government might have run. And just in that one Fast and Furious operation, though, they were following over 2,000 weapons that went south into Mexico. So it was quite a scandal. Still is.
Wow. And what do you think is going to happen to the Attorney General? I mean, this administration continues on for another term, kind of has some type of protection if he doesn't win an election, the current administration, then he's pretty much on his own.
Well, he's a very politicized or polarizing individual, I guess. But I guess any Democrat is for the Republican opposition. I don't think anything will happen to him.
Okay.
I really don't think he knew about the operation.
Of course he doesn't.
A couple of levels below him, they did know about it. I guess it was the Deputy Assistant Attorney General approved or had an application to tap some phones of these straw purchasers in Arizona. He had that on his desk, so he would have read about the operation, but for some reason didn't see fit to inform the Attorney General. So I don't think the Attorney General knew about it, and you could criticize him for maybe creating an atmosphere where his subordinates did not keep him informed. That was, I think, the operation had some risks involved, and those risks turned out to actually be very dire in nature. So you can definitely, he's open for some criticism, but I don't think anything's going to happen to him.
So you think it's just really political happening in one sense?
Well, I think it did turn into people were trying to make political capital out of it, which is not a good thing when you had a U.S. federal agent being killed. As I'm not saying that he wouldn't have been killed anyway. I'm sure that there are other places that the drug traffickers could have gotten their weapons, but it certainly looks very bad when it comes from a government operation.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to leave us with regarding this particular operation that you think it's long-term was going to happen?
Well, one thing I'd like to mention, and it's part of this operation, but it touches on the drug war itself, is we just had a presidential debate on foreign policy, and neither the president nor Governor Romney mentioned Mexico or the drug war. Mexico is a neighboring country. We have $6 billion of exports going into Mexico. We have a criminal insurgency down there that has cost 60,000 lives since the year 2006, and not a single mention was made either of the country or of the war on drugs during those debates. And I think that's absolutely amazing. These are issues that certainly we need to be paying more attention to.
Wow. So any other countries have these Fast and Furious guns?
Yeah, there have been reports of the guns showing up in Colombia. I don't know if that's been, I haven't seen any verification of that. It's mostly down in Mexico, but 2,000 weapons, that's an awful lot of weapons down there. And it's just, that's an indication of how many weapons are going down there, because that was just one government operation, and many more weapons go down there that are not associated with any kind of an undercover operation, of course.
Is this type of operation is kind of a normal procedure? I'm sure we don't even hear even a third of all the things that goes array, all these covert operations throughout the world. I mean, maybe I was involved by chance, but we don't hear a lot of the things that goes on with these type of operations. Is this really normal procedure? And also, they never make these things public, so how can you really test when something goes wrong? You really don't want to disclose the operation itself, because it might affect some other type of operation.
I think you're right, Tim. I think we only hear about these operations if something does go bad. As far as whether or not it's normal procedure, I think there were attempts to do the same type of thing during the Bush administration, and that was something, of course, that the Republicans were not talking about when they were criticizing the Attorney General. But the Bush administration had an operation, I think, back in 2006, where not on the same scale, but they were trying to trace some guns that were going into Mexico, and several hundred weapons went across the border then. So I would say it was sort of an ill-conceived operation. I don't think this is normal. At least I hope it's not normal. So, and I think we're only going to hear about those things when they do go wrong. And there are a lot of things in the intelligence world that we don't need to hear about. That's a contradiction between having a democracy and having an effective intelligence service. You can't have too much openness or too much oversight, or else you kind of cripple your intelligence services. So you can't have the best of both worlds in that count. You have to give a little bit, to have an effective intelligence agency. I'm not referring to the ATF, but just intelligence agencies in general. Democracy and intelligence agencies is sort of an inherent contradiction.
Tell us what's in the premise of the new Tex-Mex book that's coming out in November.
Well, Tex-Mex deals with a Mexican drug cartel, which, in collusion with a very high-ranking Mexican politician and a very high-ranking U.S. politician, make a move to take political control of South Texas. And it's about the efforts of an old-school Texas cowboy who finds himself in the middle of everything, his Mexican wife, and a group of former CIA operatives who try to get to the bottom of it when the government fails to do so. So it's got a bit of everything. There's a love story in there. I think it's a pretty good yarn. I think it calls attention to a number of problems without suggesting any solutions that are kind of any guaranteed solutions, that is, because these are difficult problems and they're problems that need more attention. And I hope that's what the book does, is maybe create some more discussion on some of these very serious security issues that we face on our southern border with Mexico.
Okay. Well, anything else you'd like to leave us with? Is there a website where you can get your current book?
Yeah, Tim, I have a website at Clabe, C-L-A-B-E, Taylor, Taylor.com. The book, again, doesn't come out until November, but Mako is available at Amazon.com, at Barnes & Noble. And then there's Spy Masters Guild, where you can also take a look at the books of my two other colleagues, Robert Morris and Michael Davidson. Their books Robert Morris was a CIA officer in Moscow in the early 80s, and he handled some of the most sensitive cases that our country ran against the Soviet Union, and he's able to talk about that now. And Michael was a CIA officer for 30 years, so you can imagine he's got some stories to tell as well.
Well, perfect. Well, I really appreciate you joining the program. And your website again is?
ClabeTaylor.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Clabe. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Tim, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, it's another production of the Core Business Show. Thank you all for listening. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet. For more information about equipment financing and asset-based loans, visit our website, applecapitalgroup.com. That's applecapitalgroup.com. Or call us at 866-611-7457. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. And remember, you can always get to the core via iTunes. You'll find all our previous episodes there. And thanks again for listening to the Core Business Show with Tim Jacquet.